In early May 1945, the Third Reich was already collapsing. Berlin had fallen. Hitler had committed suicide on April 30th. The fronts were disintegrating. Entire armies were surrendering in corps-sized formations, and the roads of Austria were filled with mixed columns of refugees, retreating units, and shattered formations. Yet in these final hours of the war, one of the most unusual battles of the entire Second World War took place, the Battle of Castle Itter, where American soldiers and members of the Wehrmacht jointly defended a fortress against SS forces in order to protect French political prisoners. Castle Itter, or Schloss Itter, is located in Tyrol, not far from the town of Wörgl. Its stone walls date back to the 13th century. By the early 20th century, it was no longer a true medieval fortress, but architecturally it retained defensive features: massive walls, an inner courtyard, and a narrow, winding approach road climbing up the hillside. After the Anschluss of Austria in 1938, the property came under Nazi control. In 1943, it was incorporated into the Dachau concentration camp system as a special prison for prominent prisoners. Unlike extermination camps, Itter served as a place of isolation for France's political elite. Among those held there were former French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud, his predecessor Édouard Daladier, General Maxime Weygand, trade union leader Léon Jouhou, Charles de Gaulle's sister Marie-Agnès de Gaulle, and the well-known tennis champion and diplomat Jean Barotra. The Nazis kept them in relatively better conditions compared to other camps. They were valuable hostages. They could potentially be used for negotiations or as human shields. However, by the spring of 1945, the discipline of the guards began to collapse. Germany was falling apart. Units of the Wehrmacht were surrendering to the Allies, but elements of the Waffen-SS, especially the most fanatical formations, refused to acknowledge defeat. In the Alpine region, rumors circulated about the creation of an Alpine fortress, a final stronghold of resistance. Many SS men believed that the prisoners should be killed before they could be liberated. On May 3, 1945, the SS guards suddenly abandoned the castle. The reasons were simple. The front was approaching. Communication with higher command was breaking down, and commanders were concerned primarily with their own survival. The French prisoners were left alone in the mountains, in an area where armed SS groups were still operating. They understood that a power vacuum did not mean freedom. It meant mortal danger. The fanatics could return at any moment. A decision was made to seek help. Through local contacts and members of the resistance, a message reached units of the U.S. 12th Armored Division advancing through Tyrol. In the region operated the 23rd Tank Battalion. Among its officers was Captain John C. Jack Lee, Jr., who would soon make a decision that would become historic. Allied forces in the area were stretched thin. Their primary mission was to disarm German units and continue advancing eastward. But the report that French prisoners might be in imminent danger demanded immediate action. Lee assembled a small force, about 14 soldiers, several jeeps, and a single M4 Sherman tank named Besotten Jenny. It was a standard vehicle equipped with a 75mm gun and machine guns, but on narrow mountain roads it was vulnerable. At this moment, the story took an unexpected turn. In the town of Wörgl was Major Josef Sepp Gangl of the Wehrmacht, commander of an artillery unit. By that time, he had distanced himself from the Nazi leadership and was cooperating with the Austrian resistance. He understood that the SS posed a threat not only to the prisoners, but also to the local population. Gangl made the decision to support the Americans. From the standpoint of military discipline, this was a breach of the chain of command, almost an act of treason. But by May 1945, the command structure of the Third Reich had effectively collapsed. Gangl joined the Americans with a small detachment of his soldiers. It was one of the rarest moments of the war. Soldiers of the Wehrmacht and the U.S. Army voluntarily fighting on the same side. On May 4, 1945, the combined group moved toward the castle. The access road was narrow and winding, and the tank advanced slowly. When they reached Itter, the prisoners greeted them with relief. But the relief was short-lived. Intelligence reports confirmed that SS units were concentrating in the area and preparing an attack. The castle had certain advantages: thick walls, elevated ground, and limited approaches. But the garrison was extremely small. In total, there were about 30 defenders, including Americans, Wehrmacht soldiers, and armed French prisoners. Ammunition was limited, and the tank remained the only heavy source of firepower. The inner courtyard became the center of the defense. Machine guns were positioned in the windows. The Americans assigned fields of fire. The French prisoners did not remain passive observers. They carried ammunition, reinforced barricades, and took up positions with rifles. For many of them, this was symbolic. After years of political struggle and imprisonment, they were once again holding weapons. At dawn on May 5, 1945, movement began in the valley below the castle. Scattered but organized groups of Waffen-SS troops took up positions among trees and stone structures. According to various estimates, the attackers numbered between 100 and 150 men. They were armed with Kar-98K rifles, MP-40 submachine guns, MG-42 machine guns, and light anti-tank weapons. Despite Germany's imminent capitulation, many of them remained fanatically committed to the idea of fighting to the end. The castle stood on elevated ground, but it was not a modern 20th-century fortress. Its walls were solid, yet not designed for contemporary warfare. The main gate opened onto the narrow access road. It was there that the Americans positioned the M4 Sherman Besotten Jenny to block any potential breakthrough. The tank became the symbol of the defense, and also an obvious target. The first exchange of fire began around 4 a.m. The SS opened fire on the positions in the windows. Bullets struck the stone walls, chipped away plaster, and shattered glass into the rooms. American soldiers and Wehrmacht troops returned fire with M1 Garand and Kar-98K rifles. The tank opened up with its Browning machine gun, attempting to suppress the attackers on the slope below. The battle quickly took on the character of a siege. The SS did not rush into a direct assault, hoping instead to wear down the garrison. They took positions behind trees and in folds of the terrain, gradually moving closer to the walls. MG-42s fired in short, sharp bursts, forcing the defenders to press themselves against the floor. Soon an event occurred that drastically worsened the defenders' position. The SS managed to disable the tank. According to one version, an anti-tank launcher was used. According to another, the tank was hit by fire from an 88mm gun positioned at a distance. In any case, Besotten Jenny was damaged and could no longer provide effective fire support. Its main gun fell silent. For the defenders, this meant the loss of their only heavy weapon. From that moment on, the defense depended entirely on small arms. Ammunition was being consumed rapidly. The Americans rationed magazines, trying not to fire unnecessarily. The Wehrmacht soldiers, acting with discipline, covered the flanks. There was no ideological trust between them, but there was a shared objective: to hold the castle. Particular tension developed in the inner courtyard. Several attackers approached the gate, attempting to blow it open or force their way through. The defenders repelled the attempt with grenades and concentrated fire. The French prisoners also took part in the defense. Jean Barotra, the famous tennis champion and diplomat, took the initiative. He volunteered to slip through the SS lines and contact American units to call for reinforcements. This decision was extremely risky. Barotra left the castle through a rear exit and, using the folds of the terrain and the forest for cover, managed to slip out of sight. In the midst of active combat, and with possible SS patrols nearby, this step required not only physical endurance, but also remarkable composure. He succeeded in reaching American lines and reporting the critical situation. Meanwhile, the fighting continued. The SS intensified their pressure. Bullets tore through wooden structures, stone chipped away under impact, and the air was thick with dust and the smell of gunpowder. At one point, Major Joseph Gangl attempted to move across the courtyard to cover one of the French prisoners. At that moment, he was struck by a sniper's shot. Gangl suffered a fatal wound and died shortly afterward. His death became a tragic symbol of the battle. A German Wehrmacht officer had fallen while defending the former enemies of his country from SS units. After the war, he would be recognized as a hero of the Austrian resistance, and a street in Vorgl would bear his name. But at that moment, his death only heightened the tension within the castle. Ammunition was running low. There was no communication with the outside world. The defenders understood that if reinforcements did not arrive soon, the assault might succeed. The SS were preparing for a final attack, gathering their forces at the foot of the hill. Closer to noon, the situation changed. New gunfire was heard from the direction of the valley. These were units of the 142nd Infantry Regiment of the U.S. 36th Infantry Division, arriving to provide support. They attacked the SS positions from the rear, forcing them to divert their forces away from the castle. In the course of a short but intense engagement, SS resistance was broken. Approximately 100 SS troops were taken prisoner. The rest scattered into the surrounding forests. Castle Itter was finally secured. The Battle of Castle Itter took place on May 5, 1945, just 2 days before the official German surrender was signed on May 7 in Reims. It was one of the last battles fought on the European theater of war. From a military standpoint, the battle held no strategic significance. It did not alter the front lines, did not influence the outcome of the war, and was not part of any large-scale operation. Yet its historical significance proved to be symbolic and unique. It was the only known instance during the Second World War in which regular units of the U.S. Army and soldiers of the Wehrmacht fought together against SS forces. It reflected the chaos of the final days of the Third Reich, when the structure of authority was collapsing, and individual officers made independent decisions based on personal conviction. The French prisoners were saved. Paul Reynaud and the other politicians returned to France and resumed public life. Jean Borotre survived the war and became a symbol of resistance. After the war, Castle Itter once again became private property. For many years, the story of the battle remained little known. It did not fit into the simple narrative of Allies versus Germany. It involved complex moral decisions, the collapse of a system, and the choices of individuals. The Battle of Castle Itter became the final note of the war in the Alps. Not a massive clash of armies, but a dramatic episode in which ideology gave way to personal responsibility. At a moment when Germany had already effectively lost the war, several dozen people faced a choice: follow the orders of a collapsing regime or protect human lives. In that battle, Americans and Germans, former enemies, united against the fanaticism of the SS. And it is this that makes the Battle of Castle Itter not merely a historical curiosity, but a symbol of how, even in the final hours of the most destructive war of the 20th century, human choice could change the fate of individuals and leave a lasting mark on history.